Let's face it, our reading and writing skills in our country, every day there's a story in the paper about how shitty our schools are. They just keep getting worse all the time. I read a book that was filled with letters that soldiers during the Civil War had written to their girlfriends back home. These guys were kids. They were 14, 15-year-old kids. Most of these guys had never even been to school, but every single letter in the book was incredible. Every single letter was like, "My dearest Hannah, this morn finds me racked by the fiery pangs of your absence. I'll bear your cherished memory with me as I battle the forces of tyranny and oppression." Now think about what the typical letter from your average modern-day soldier to his girlfriend back home in, like, New Jersey's got to read like. "Dear Marie, it is hot as fuck out here. It is hard to fight these sand monkeys with your balls stuck to your legs. It is very, very hot out here because I am in the desert. What else did I want to ask you? Oh yeah, don't fuck nobody, like it back."
I thought it would be fun to start this video with that clip to remind everyone that 150 years ago, before the government spent any money on education, when it was solely in the domain of the free market, that literacy rates were over 99%, and everyone, no matter how poor they were able to get an education. Hi, Contrarian Dude here. Now, it's no secret that the public schooling system is failing our children. At the end of this video, we have some very funny clips that highlight just how bad the government is doing at its job. Although they are funny, they're also very sad. Every parent on the planet wants the best education for their children, and yet the results are so poor. It is clear that the government is to blame. They forcibly took control of the education system, and it has steadily worsened ever since. The only question is, was there a deliberate attempt to dumb us down, or just the usual ineptness of government? Sadly, it was deliberate. Let's turn to another comedian for the answer why.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
Okay, so that is the truth of it. Now let's hear from one of the owners of the country. In 1906, John D. Rockefeller said this: "In our dreams we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our moulding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk." Well, the limitless resources he has control of is the taxing authority of the government and the power to print money at the Federal Reserve. You've learned about those in other videos on this channel. In order to show how they took control of the education system, I have to deviate from the topic of education for just a minute. I have to explain tax-exempt foundations. Most people think that tax-exempt foundations are tax-exempt because they are charitable. That is just the sales pitch. The truth is nothing of the sort. I might do an in-depth video on these foundations in the future, but so we can return to the topic of education, I will just give you the basic facts. If you wanted to steal the wealth of a nation, the two most efficient ways to do it is tax and inflation. In 1913, the members of the big club George Carlin was talking about got both. They told the people they needed a Federal Reserve to protect them from the predatory big banks they owned of course, and they said in order to make the wealthy pay for the less fortunate, we needed an income tax. As is their MO, the big club funded grassroots campaigns to demand these two infringements of liberty, all the while pretending to be against them in the public sphere. They designed the Federal Reserve to consolidate their banking power, outlaw competition, and bail them out if they ever needed it. They also created tax-exempt foundations, so their wealth and income would never be taxed. So what does this have to do with achieving their dreams of a grateful people who yield themselves with perfect docility to their moulding hands? Well, answers came in 1954 when Congress set up what was known as the Reece Committee to investigate the operations of the tax-exempt foundations. The head of this committee was a man by the name of Norman Dodd. In 1982, Mr. Dodd was interviewed on film. The video is over 50 minutes long and it is linked in the description. Here are some critical excerpts from that video that are crucial to understanding why there is a steady degradation in the teaching at public schools.
At what point in your career did you become connected with the Reece Committee?
1953.
1953.
Yeah.
And what was that capacity, sir?
That was the capacity of what they call Director of Research for the Reece Committee.
Can you tell us what the Reece Committee was attempting to do?
Yes, I can tell you. It was operating and carrying out instructions embodied in a resolution passed by the House of Representatives, which was to investigate the activities of foundations as to whether or not these activities could justifiably be labeled un-American. In response to a letter which I had written to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, asking certain questions and gathering certain information. And Dr. Johnson said, after, again, amenities, Mr. Dodd, we have your letter. We can answer all those questions, but it'd be a great deal of trouble. And we have a counter-suggestion. And our counter-suggestion is that if you can spare a member of your staff for 2 weeks and send that member up to New York, we will give to that member a room in the library and the minute books of this foundation since its inception. And we think that whatever you want to find out or the Congress wants to find out will be obvious from those minutes. Well, my first reaction was they lost their mind. She came back at the end of 2 weeks with the following in the way of on dictaphone belts. At that time, their interest shifts over to preventing what they call a reversion of life in the United States to what it was prior to 1914, when World War I broke out. And they arrive at that point, they come to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, we must control education in the United States. And they realize that that's a pretty big task. So to them, it is too big for them alone, so they approach the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that that portion of education which could be considered domestic be handled by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which is international should be handled by the endowment. And they then decide that the key to the success of these two operations lay in an alteration in the teaching of American history. So they approach 4 of the then most prominent teachers of American history in the country, people like Charles and Mary Byrd, and their suggestion to them is, will they alter the manner in which they present this subject, and they get turned down flat. So they then decide that it is necessary for them to do, as they say, build our own stable of historians. And then they approach the Guggenheim Foundation, which specializes in fellowships, and say, when we find young men in the process of studying for doctorates in the field of American history, and we feel that they are the right caliber. Will you grant them fellowships on our say-so? And the answer is yes. So under that condition, eventually they assembled 20. And they take this 20 potential teachers of American history to London, and there they're briefed into what is expected of them when, as and if they secure appointments in keeping with the doctorates they will have earned. And that group of 20 historians ultimately becomes the nucleus of the American Historical Association. A rationalization of their decision to do everything they could to stop the completion of this investigation in the direction that it was moving, which would have been an exposure of this Carnegie Endowment story and the Ford Foundation and the Guggenheim and the Rockefeller Foundation, all working in harmony toward the control of education in the United States.
So has the big club been successful in creating a grateful and docile folk? I will leave you with the following clip and you can decide for yourself.
Okay. Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.